Hello, I am 8mm Mauser Man, and last month I did a video, 7 reasons why the Mosin Nagant is better than Mausers. However, this time I would like to reverse that and do 7 reasons why Mausers are better than Mosin Nagants. And in this video there will be several things that are basically repeats, or I guess complete opposites, of the last video. The first one is a really clear example of that, and that is that there are a wide variety of Mausers, whereas Mosin Nagants really only come in, well, one variant, although there are many variants. They're all basically the same pattern. I did this same example last time, but this is my M44, which is made in 1946, one of the last Mosin Nagants variants made. And this is my Remington 1891, and it is one of the earliest Mosin Nagant variants made. However, from really here to about here, these rifles are almost identical, the main differences being the length of the barrel, the sights, and how the bayonets attach. Generally speaking, the action of Mosin Nagants, though, is all pretty much the same. And by that I mean they're all a pretty similar design, although there are some differences in stocks. The bolts, the magazines, all of those are almost all identical. However, with a lot of Mauser variants, you'll look at them and you'll say, this might not even be the same type of gun made by the same designer. For example, if you look at a normal Gewehr 98, and compare that to a Swedish Mauser or Argentinian Mausers, they are radically different. Argentinian Mausers, for example, have magazines that come out the bottom of the gun, whereas other Mausers have flush-fitting magazines. Swedish Mausers, as an example, have a completely different stock and sighting system than 98 pattern Mausers or other variants. Even this Yugoslavian 2447, which looks like it's just a straight bolt-handled Kar 98K, does have some pretty major differences from the Kar 98K. The bolts are not interchangeable. The sights start at 200 meters instead of 100 meters. The front sight has a hood, whereas most Kar 98Ks don't have hooded front sights. Even though this looks pretty similar to other 98 pattern Mausers, it has several differences. Now, that definitely comes with its disadvantages if you're trying to find parts for a gun or something like that. However, it also has its advantages because you can keep it within collecting just Mausers and have a much wider variety than if you're just collecting Mosin Nagants. Now, probably one of the greatest advantages that you get with a Mauser versus a Mosin Nagant is the rimless cartridge. Now, even though there are so many different Mosin Nagant variants, every single one, as far as I'm aware of, does have a rimless cartridge. What does that mean? This is a round of 8mm Mauser, and this is a round of 7.62x54R. 8mm Mauser has a recessed rim right here, and that's what the extractor grabs onto to pull it out of the chamber. This 7.62x54R has a rim right here, and that is what the extractor grabs onto to pull it out of the chamber. The rimmed cartridge can lead to a number of different issues, and we're going to talk about those in a little bit, but one of the big ones is rimmed cartridges are just harder to properly feed, whereas rimless cartridges are quite a bit easier. You'll notice that almost every single cartridge we use today is rimless, and that's because it's better in almost every single case. So there are lots of different rounds that Mausers will shoot, like 8mm Mauser like this, 7mm Mauser, 7.65, which is sometimes called 7.65 Turkish. Swedish guns are in 6.5, and there are even Mausers in 7.62x51. Now, the third reason why Mausers are better than Mosin Nagants is because of the stripper clip design. The stripper clip design is a direct result of the rimmed cartridge. Mauser stripper clips usually look something like this. There are some different variants, and I actually have a video comparing some of the most common variants with 8mm stripper clips. This one is Romanian. Now, if you look at this, all the rounds are in line, they are held directly on top of one another, and there's nothing to really bind up on when you're stripping it into the magazine. However, this one of 7.62x54R, you'll notice that I have these rounds in a certain way, and that's because they usually feed better if the rounds are one on top of another. So whereas this stripper clip can be put in either direction and easily feed and it's going to make no difference, generally speaking, 7.62x54R stripper clips will feed better if you have the top round with the rim in front of the round under it and have every round following that pattern. Then, usually you lift the top round and push it in like that. Generally speaking, these stripper clips work fine, they're just harder to use than these ones. Another thing to talk about is that 8mm or 7mm stripper clips can be found relatively easily, and many of them are interchangeable. However, it's not really true with 7.62x54R stripper clips. If you can find the black original Russian ones, they work really well. However, a lot of what you'll find is these cheap and crappy Chinese ones made of stamped steel, and then they have a fake Tula stamp on the back, which is kind of funny. these just don't work very well in a number of different guns. It really is luck of the draw whether these will work okay in your specific gun. I've had multiple Mosin Nagants that they don't work, and I've had multiple that they do work. However, generally speaking, the original Russian ones are good to go. The next complication comes into the magazine. Mauser magazines are, in general, dead simple. I'm going to show you a 98 type magazine, but other magazines are pretty simple as well. Basically, it has a plate on the bottom, a spring on the inside, and then a follower, just like every magazine should have those three components. This one is double stacked, so it doesn't extend past the bottom of the gun, which means it's less likely to get damaged, and they feed really reliably with very few issues. Now, Mosin Nagant magazines are a little bit more complicated. They do have the base, the spring, and then the follower that you can see right here. So the follower is up top, then you have the base, and then the spring is in the middle. This part isn't the weird part. It does extend below the wood, which isn't really an issue. I've never seen one of these damaged, but it does increase the likelihood for you hitting it on things. However, because of that rimmed cartridge, the magazine needs to have a specific piece called an interrupter, and that is there to make sure that you don't get rim lock from the lower round, stopping the upper round from feeding. Now, I've had Mosin Nagants that were worn or damaged, and because of that, the interrupter didn't work properly and rim lock was possible. Also, whereas the Mauser magazine has fixed feed lips, the Mosin Nagant has these weird feed lips that are like sort of connected to the top. Basically, you have this one piece that is fulfilling the role of that interrupter, it's fulfilling the role of the feed lip, and it's fulfilling the role of the ejector. It's performing all of these different things at once, and because of that, it's a little bit more likely to have malfunctions than something like a Mauser, which doesn't have one part performing so many different functions. This is not me saying that Mosin Nagants are unreliable, however, it is me saying that in my experience, Mosin Nagants have been more likely to experience feeding issues caused by the magazine than Mausers. Now, I'm done talking about issues caused by the rim cartridge. There are some others, but those are the big ones. This is my M44, and it is a good example of the next issue, which is mushy triggers, or just kind of trigger issues in general. And this isn't necessarily true of all Mosin Nagants, it's just that the triggers are kind of an inconsistent component. Some of them have great triggers, some of them have really, really poor triggers. This one has a relatively poor trigger. And so you'll notice right here that the trigger just has a lot of flop back and forth. Like if I lean it forward, you can see that it droops. And then if I tilt it back up, then it goes back again. Now, that's not necessarily the biggest issue in the world. However, if I pull the trigger, and I cleared this before I started filming, but just to show you guys before I pull the trigger again, it is clear. I'm going to pull the trigger. You'll notice it's just kind of mushy. Now, Mauser triggers aren't really like that. Mauser triggers are a two-stage. So you pull the trigger until it hits a wall, and then you pull it, and it pulls like normal. Now, I want to be clear, I have had some Mosin Nagants that had really, really good triggers. However, I've also handled a Mosin Nagant that was one of those guns where you started to pull the trigger and then you were like, is the safety still on? And then you filled with the safety, realized it was off, and you just realized the trigger was really, really heavy. That isn't all models, however, just some examples do have some really heavy triggers. Next, let's talk about bolts. This is a Mauser bolt, and this is a Mosin Nagant bolt. For a number of reasons, the Mauser has a superior bolt. The first one is that the bolt head and bolt body are all one piece. From here to here, with the exception of the extractor, that is all one piece, whereas with Mosin Nagants, the bolt head and bolt body are two separate components. That means that the Mauser has some more rigidity in that area, and it also means that it's just less loose, it's tighter, whereas the Mosin Nagant is a lot looser. Another failure point of the Mosin Nagant is the extractor. Now, generally speaking with firearms, it's pretty common that extractors are wearing components that are meant to be replaced over time. I've had multiple Mosin Nagants that have had extractor issues. I haven't really had that problem as frequently with Mausers, and it's because that extractor is oversized and really stupid big. These extractors are just really good at doing their job, whereas Mosin Nagant extractors, which are just kind of hammered in place, are prone to failure. They're prone to breaking, they're prone to just getting worn out as well. The next thing to talk about is how Mausers handle gas. Mosin Nagants don't necessarily handle gas poorly, however, if there is a ruptured case, that gas, it is possible that it can come back towards the shooter. There are some grooves in the bolt that push it in the right direction, but it still can be an issue. Mausers, however, have just excellent ways of handling a gas. They have special grooves in the receiver and in the bolt that push the gas away from the shooter, and if it does go back, it also hits the bolt shroud, which pushes it to the sides instead of directly back into your face. This is just a well-designed bolt in the sense of handling gas. One other aspect of bolt design is that you'll notice that the handle on Mauser bolts are all the way in the back, whereas with Mosin Nagant bolts, it's kind of in the middle. With Mauser bolts, what this means is that your hand is right next to the bolt handle when you go to use it. And so it at least should be quicker to shoot because your hand doesn't have to travel as far to get to that bolt. However, with the Mosin Nagant bolt, you sort of have to reach your hand forward in order to grab it. With the Mauser, I have my hand right here. It's right above. And so it's just sort of right above the trigger. And I guess it is a little bit forward still, but it is closer. Mosin Nagants, however, you'll see that the bolt is quite a bit far away from my trigger finger. So I have it right here, and then I need to go forward and lift it up. So if I have it fired, I have it like this, and I reach my hand up. I need to get forward in order to lift it. There's another advantage of this too that we should talk about next, and that's because it's partially related. Mauser bolts after firing are easier to open oftentimes, and that is two reasons. One, in my experience, Mauser bolts are just smoother than Mosin Nagant bolts, which means you can open it easier and fire it faster. However, another part of this is because of that length difference. Because right here, my hand isn't stretching as far, and it is just more natural to fire it, or to lift it from this position. With Mosin Nagants, however, because it's further forward, I really do need to reach out here. It just feels a lot less natural. Now, while we're talking about ergonomics, let's talk about the final reason, at least in this list, why Mausers are better than Mosin Nagants, and that comes down to just ergonomics. It's the way that the grip is, and I prefer Mausers in that aspect personally. Now you'll notice right here, Mosin Nagants don't have a pistol grip or anything like that, so you're just left to pull it into your shoulder with your right hand without anything really to grab onto. So you're right here and you are pulling. There's not quite as much to grab onto, although you also have your left hand to pull. With Mausers, it is a little bit better because there's that semi-pistol grip. So if you have it like this, you just have a little bit more purchase with your hand as you're pulling it, and so you can get behind it a little bit easier, which for at least 8mm recoil is pretty nice because 8mm is a beast. So to wrap this up, there are a number of reasons why a Mauser is better and a number of reasons why the Mosin Nagant is better from both a military adoption perspective and from a modern military surplus shooter's perspective. However, personally, I live in America, so I'm just going to choose to have both. I love both, I shoot both, I enjoy both, and they're both really great rifles. However, they do both have their drawbacks and their advantages. So with that being said, I know I have angered many Mosin Nagant fanboys, but I lived on.
Which proves it's hard to get the best of a man named John.
John.